Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of EVKA's Talk at 5 o'clock. It's my honor to get here on September 13th. It's Friday the 13th, so if we get a little bit spooky here, just bear with us. And before we dive into the David story, I really want to share my personal first impression that I think you will be able to relate to a lot of it. David and I were supposed to connect for just a quick 15 minutes, get to know each other call. And that call lasted for, I guess, David, what was it, over an hour. So I felt like I got on a call with the next Tony Robbins or something similar to that. So I told him that his true calling is probably even greater than he can possibly imagine. And the impact it can make in the society, in the community, in a business world is greater than his wildest thoughts. But don't take my word for it. I'm happy to introduce you to David and dive deeper in his story. So David, dive in from a point of view where you wanted to start, and I'll help you navigate through it.
Well, Eva, thanks for having me on here, and what an intro. I hope I can live up to it. Yeah, I think we were on a call for about an hour and a half, and it was, we covered a lot of ground. And so I think one of the areas that we talked about for this particular episode was to really kind of get into my leadership path, more or less where I came from, and then really where it's led me today. And so I won't go too far back and discuss what kind of science project I did in grade 3, but I will take you back far enough to know that I was an athlete most of my life, and I think a lot of my competitive juices just came from growing up as somebody who was really into sports, and then exceeding expectations in swimming in particular, where I swam collegiately at the Division I level, and then add to that, I think my work ethic really comes from my roots and from my dad, who was always a hard worker. And so I think just growing up on the East Coast and being in sports and being under more or less the mentorship of my dad when it came to work, it really kind of imparted some strong work ethic and values in terms of being competitive and charging that success. But it wasn't easy. The journey has not been easy, and the journey has not always been fun, as you and I discussed last time. But, I started my career. I split undergrad between University of North Carolina and Arizona State University. I went to carry there for undergrad to finish up. And then I went over to University of Illinois Fab-Phone for my graduate studies and got an MBA there. When I moved to Southern California after grad school, I got into software technology. And that was during the dot-com craze, where everybody was printing money. And I thought, well, surely this is the fast track to being a millionaire, right? And so I got into software and technology, and within a couple of years, .com went .bomb, and everybody was unemployed and broke. The stock options didn't hold any more water. I fell into securities. I figured, well, I'm going to use my finance background that I learned in grad school, and I'm going to go manage money, become a wealth manager. And so I went and I took my FINRA licensing exams, and shortly after passing all of those, 9/11, and within about 4 months. And so nobody wanted to talk to, money managers, wealth advisors, financial planners. The markets had, basically shut down. And I was like, what's going on? It was kind of like two false starts, and I didn't know what was going to happen. Then I fell into commercial real estate, not on the broker side, but more on the operating company side. So companies that would go out and buy properties, and they would manage them and portfolio the properties. And so I learned a lot about commercial real estate, by falling into it more or less, and was running acquisitions for an apartment owner that was doing a lot of condo conversions, and they were a manager of, I don't know, 3,000 units at the time. This is going back in the early 2000s. And it was a sink or swim deal. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to underwrite a deal. I didn't know how to source a deal. I didn't know how to talk to the brokers. I didn't know how to talk to the asset managers who were putting the business plans together. And then I had to go talk to the bankers and some of the equity partners. And I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. So really over my skis, but learned a lot. And in 2007, as we all know, the housing crisis kind of boiled over. And so there was some movement there. And then to follow, and for an encore, we had the 2008 credit crisis. So not only was real estate values, cratering, but you didn't have any kind of liquidity in the market because banks were not lending money. And at the time, banks were going completely out of business and losing their charters. And we saw Lehman Brothers, a century plus old institution in Wall Street, go under. And it was a scary time for a lot of people in real estate, in banking and finance. And I was approached by the CEO of a bank in San Diego that was publicly traded to help him come in as a consultant and just help him with some special projects. And one of the things he wanted me to do was to build out the special assets group that did not exist at the bank at the time. And at the end of the meeting, he asked, do you have any questions? I said, just one, Greg. And I said, what's a special asset? And, unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to me, neither one of us really understood or appreciated what the heck this meant. All he knew is that his bank didn't have the department. They needed it. The regulators were, barking down his throat and really wanted this thing to be built out. So really with little guidance, because he couldn't provide any, and I had no experience, I had to basically figure out really just by talking to other people at other banks, like, what do you do? What is this? What's the day in the life of you? What is this? What does your special assets group do at your bank? And really built that out. And we went through 2 regulatory audits with the OCC. I really, to this day, don't know how we didn't lose our banking charter, but we somehow survived. We got a slap on the wrist here and there, but nothing too major. And we had to work out a portfolio of about $1 billion for commercial loans that were in distress. And I ran with my hair.
Start with. So what was the portfolio size before you guys started?
What was the what?
What the size of the portfolio was before you started?
Well, the loan portfolio that I was assigned to was $1 billion, and that was all collateralized by commercial real estate assets. They had C&I loan portfolio. They had a residential loan portfolio. These were all commercial real estate loans. They had some unsecured credit, lines that they had to protect and manage. But really, this was a commercial real estate portfolio. So it was $1.4 billion with the potential risk to the bank, and not all of it was underwater, but it was all potential risk at the time. And I had to learn how to figure out how to do this so that the regulators wouldn't beat us up too bad when they came in for their audit. So we went through it. I ran there for a few years, really worked my way out of the job. We were able to resolve just about all of the distress. I mean, I would open files, and because I had friends in banking, they told me, here's the checklist, here are the things you got to look for in the file when you open a credit file and a collateral file. And there'd be things missing in there that were really important, like a deed of trust, a security agreement where you wanted to enforce the rights and remedies of the lender. In this case, it was us, the bank. We didn't have any legal standing to enforce the mortgage to be paid, and we had no legal standing to go confiscate the property through a receivership process because we had no evidence that we had a legal right for that. But I didn't have to tell the borrowers that. So there were times where I was playing chicken and pretending that, I had a full house, holding a full house, and work out some kind of modification or repayment plan with the borrowers. So it was, I learned a lot. It was really stressful. I don't wish that upon anybody. I went through 2 audits for the regulators. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on your podcast, but I'd rather go through a cavity search with TSA agent than go through an OCC audit again. So, and then I worked my way out of a role there. We were able to resolve all that stress. And then I landed at a company that had Sequoia Equity Partners had just released a CMBS workout platform in San Diego. And I worked there for a number of years, just kind of restructuring the CMBS, which was a completely different animal, and it involved a lot of distress. And I think it's funny because here we are in today's market cycle, and it's very much, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk in the marketplace. And I think we're going to see a lot of distress come to the market, not just in real estate and real estate lending and in banks, but I think we're going to see a lot of things where, companies are going to need people who know how to navigate the waters of managing risk and working out complex capital structures at operating companies, as well as, asset-based portfolio companies, whether that's real estate or something else. So I think we're really at the doorstep of another wave of that to come, which is, in some cases, a lot of people see that as a scary thing. It's a threat. But, for the wise, experienced investors out there, it's an opportunity. And in fact, a lot of your bigger institutions have been putting together war chests of cash for years now with the anticipation of this coming. So, and we're here. I don't know if it's going to happen at the end of the year or next year or the year after, but I think we're within a couple of years of something happening.
Usually this is what we see, right? When the economy dips down, creates an immersive power of opportunities for new businesses to emerge, the new technologies, new dynamics in shifting in priorities. And there's new millionaires are made in a recession times, or actually they start pivoting when the economy goes down and pull it up.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see, and what are your perspective in terms of the dynamics of do you think that there's going to be a new depression, like economical recession times, or you think we're going to just touch certain areas of economics that will be impacted?
This is where I regret not getting a degree in economics and becoming an economist, because if you ask 10 economists that same question, you would probably get 10 slightly different responses, and they'd all be 100% right and 100% wrong, depending on what happens. And my view is, I think we're at the doorstep of a major market correction, both in the equities market. That means, the Dow Jones. I think a lot of your S&P is insulated because of the big tech companies. But I think the Dow Jones will be materially impacted. I think hard assets like real estate are going to be materially impacted, both residential and commercial. There are, several hundred billion of loans that are secured by commercial real estate that are coming due over the next couple of years. And I don't think we have enough liquidity in the marketplace today to refinance all of those assets. And a lot of those assets are really underwater, because you look at the office properties no longer carry the same value they did when they first got their loans. So when they go to get refinanced, if they can, they're going to be underwritten at a much lower valuation than they were the first time when they got the loan that's on the building now. So it's like I said, it's scary times, but optimistic times. It depends on your position and whether you've been prepared for this or not.
So what would be your recommendations for all of those small to mid-sized private equity firms that are investing in commercial real estate or in some small startups to be on the lookout for? Are there any early signs that should be alert them to really gear up for some major shifts?
Well, I think the bigger institutions have been preparing for this. In fact, I think they've spent the greater part of the last 2-3 years amassing capital for this very strategy of distress. And it just hasn't come yet. But they have the money. I think if you're a smaller operator, or you're a smaller firm, or you're an individual investor, and you don't really have that huge balance sheet, I think this is a time to kind of pause, wait and see, because those who have the balance sheet large enough to take the hits, and also to absorb some of the uncertainty, because what we don't know is when. We do know it's going to happen. We just don't know when, and we don't know to what extent. So if it's a very severe and, very steep market drop, people with bigger balance sheets, as big institutions, they can absorb that kind of hit. If you're a smaller operator or you're a smaller investment firm, you may not have the wherewithal to stomach it and weather that out. And once it hits bottom, you don't know if it's going to be a V, it's going to be a U, or it could be really a long, protracted sort of flat line for a while before things start recovering again. So if you're smaller, I would sit on the sidelines. And I know a lot of decent sized operators that are not active right now. They're just kind of pumping the brakes and kind of wait to see what happens.
And what about the companies that are gearing up to be acquired? There is a lot of dynamics in commercial and GovCon space that are gearing up. There's a lot of smaller folks that are hoping to get into the exit strategy into the small or mid-sized private equity firms, especially the small business owners. They're navigating their path to like, hey, I really want to retire in the next 2 to 3 years. So what should they just stick around for another 3 or 4? Or what would you say to those people who really aiming to a shorter time frame of exit?
Now, it's a great question. I think kind of it leads to how I got from Southern California to Phoenix a little over 8 years ago. I was brought out here to help turn around a publicly traded REIT, real estate investment trust, and it was in trouble. And so we were able to turn that REIT around in a few years and sell away our subsidiary company to a pretty large LA-based institutional fund manager. And with that, I exited that business, fell into land development, which then led me into running a pretty large and established multifamily developer, owner, operator. And, just coming from a big company, corporate environment to a smaller, more entrepreneurial corporate culture was excellent experience for me because it just showed what you could do on the private side, and how much more nimble you could be to market opportunity than big behemoth public company that had all these, controls and bureaucratic, approval layers. And so it was refreshing. In more recent months, I've really taken a step back from real estate for all the reasons I've mentioned. Plus, we have a liquidity crisis going on in America right now. There are a lot of real estate investors and developers that are trying to find money, and they're going to their banks and they're trying to get the loans, at least the debt side of it, for their projects, and are struggling to procure and secure the financing necessary to close on the deal. And these are good deals. These are good deals in strong markets, great location, great business plan, experienced operators, and they're struggling. And so the writing on the wall for me was, hey, this is a time where I think real estate's going to maybe, it's kind of going through its own little correction right now. If you notice, rates have come down recently, but real estate's not skyrocketing in response. And that tells me that the fundamentals are a little shaky still. And people still perceive the market as risk on, a lot of risk in the market right now. With that said, that kind of segue into what you asked, which is really the M&A piece, right, of operating business. It's not necessarily real estate, but, it could be light manufacturing. It could be business and professional services, a lot of your residential services like HVAC, roofing, commercial landscaping. A lot of these small cap companies, all the way up to the mid cap, are prime for acquisitions, in part due to a number of dynamics at play. You have an aging out situation. A lot of baby boomers are owners of these privately held businesses. In fact, I think there's over 33 million privately held businesses in the United States today. And you got to think about how many baby boomers are retiring on a daily basis. I think it's like 10,000, something like that.
So
Yeah.
Read that.
So you've got an aging out thing right there. And there isn't really a vacuum. I mean, there's going to be a vacuum effect because it's not like you're getting a 1-for-1, like as one person retires or ages out, that you have somebody else coming in to replace that person. It's almost like you have a deficit. So I think there's a lot of that. I think private equity also, there just hasn't been enough deal flow the last 5 or 6 years for them to deploy their capital. If they don't deploy their capital, it goes away. And so they're a big part of their business model is making sure that money's constantly churning in and out of portfolio companies and operating companies. Historically, private equity would not go far down the line to acquire businesses that are, under 50 or 100 million. Now they are looking at smaller privately held companies. I had an opportunity to meet an Amazon bestseller author who was a former CEO of a private equity portfolio company. And he shared so many nuggets of wisdom. I spent a weekend with him and I walked away going, wow, this is a huge opportunity. But one of the things he shared with me, and I think we talked about this the first time we met, was that when a business owner is ready to exit their business, whether it's retirement, health, whatever the life event is, 80% of them fail to sell the company upon exit. And I looked at him and I said, that seems like an extremely high fail rate. Like, how's that possible with everybody wants a deal nowadays? He said, because these companies are run like the entrepreneur started them and the metrics are all skewed. And so 80% really fail. And I said, well, what happens? He goes, they just shut down. They'll liquidate what they can, whether that's maybe it's a customer database or some office furniture or technology, hardware or whatever. But generally they just unload what they can and they unplug the business, which is a shame because you think about these entrepreneurs, the blood, sweat, and tears they put into building the company, starting the company, the sacrifices they made, the sacrifices their families had to make along the way. And when you're ready to exit the business, to not be given the opportunity to take a bite of the apple on the way out, to me was just, I don't know, the head scratch. I'm like, why do it? And I said to him, what if we could change the fail rate from 80% down to like just even 70%, you know? I mean, just to improve it 10%. I mean, there's a business there. He goes, you should look into that. I said, well, why haven't you looked into it? He says, I don't have the time. You look into it. So I did. And I started asking around and I started networking and talking to people. And sure enough, this has been kind of a consistent theme in the private company ownership space and the entrepreneur space, is that they struggle to sell the company, or they'll sell it through a broker thinking it's like listing a house. We're just going to find a broker who's really active. We're going to list it. And within 6-12 months, we're going to have a buyer. And that isn't always the case. In fact, it's a high probability of fail rate there too. And so one of the things that I walked away from is, what if we could create a vision where a business could be developed where we can actually advise these CEOs and business owners as to what is the scorecard have to look like for you to really get a seat at the table at the qualified buyers dinner. You know, we're human, right? So we tend to focus on the things we really like and are easy. So you think about how you start your day or your week. You're always going to be quick to do the things you enjoy or are easy for you. But the things that you don't really enjoy or are not as easy, you put it off until the last minute. It's like why people wait till the last minute to do their taxes. They could start it in January, February, but they wait till, 2 days before taxes are due. Hey, I should do my taxes. And it's the same thing. And so what if we could walk CEOs and business owners through a process that helps them compare where their company is today versus where their company needs to be from a scorecard perspective? And then what are the things that need to be done to marry those two up? And how long would that take? And to really kind of walk them through that, not necessarily from a consulting perspective, but really an advisor, becoming an advisor to the company, so that, they don't have to, the cost of getting that advisory isn't so prohibitive. And there are a lot of business owners that are really responding to this and saying, hey, this is a unique approach. I want to retire, but I'm probably a couple years out. That's perfect. If somebody says, hey, I want to retire, but I was thinking 5 years from now, but now I got a health issue and I have to be out of here in 60 days, that's going to be a tough sledding. But somebody who says, I got a year or I got 2 years, and that's plenty of time for us to make some alignment adjustments for them.
So that's interesting, because I am connected to a number of investment banking, and they are actually, and there's a capitalist and there are conscious capitalists. And so I tend to lean towards the just capitalist ones, but I have quite a few of them actually looking for these type of companies and are willing to work with the owners, hoping that there will be somebody advising them to get them to the point that, because at the end, it creates the winning situation for everybody involved. There's, they have their buyers, right? Their private equity firms, the VC capitals or whatever, or larger organizations that consolidate their market share, and they are asking to finance the deal. So the investment bankers are looking for this perfect match, and they're seeking out actively the smaller businesses in many different industries who are ready to exit. However, when they come to the banker, they cannot even elaborate on the basic financials details. Or if it comes to the government space, the government contracting space, the simple questions like, what is your pipeline work, waterfall looks like? They look at with a deer in the headlight, what are you talking about? I've been running my business, and it's understandable. There's nothing to be really concerned, because they've been focusing for many, many years to grow their business, to really stabilize their foundation, in hoping, perceive that they can pass it to the next generations. However, the Gen Zs are not so much into acquiring the moms' businesses anymore, and leaving the moms and pops to really figure out what is their requirement plan, what is the strategy for them to really exit. And I think there is a lot of, I'm totally hearing you, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to really consciously help people. I've known personally many small businesses that run their business heart and souls into it to grow and scale, and they only know their areas.
Right. That's
right.
right.
To out of it, and what is actually in demand, and how their financial statement should look like, what they can change in a near future, let's say 6 months to a year, get a higher valuation to have a better result in a return, by making some small insignificant things. So back to you, what do you think the time frame for prepare the business for a much better strategic exit than if they would have just gone straight to the broker, straight to the banker, hoping for the best? So what is the time frame for that? Like, is it a year, 2 years, 6 months?
Yeah, well, I think it depends, right? I mean, it depends on the current situation. It's almost like a bell curve. You got your outliers, right? And then you got the lump right in the middle there. And I would say for the people that fall right in that middle section of that bell curve, I think it's at least 9 months, sometimes up to a year would probably be a reasonable period of time. Companies that really have not done what they needed to do may require over a year. I think the big thing for private equity or the buyer pool in general, not just private equity, but high net worth and ultra high net worth investors, buyers, as well as their family offices, there's the proliferation of family offices that are now out active. Yeah. So with the proliferation of family offices, it actively investing in hard assets, not just real estate, but in operating companies as well. I think, you have, a certain expectation of where the company should be performing. And I think some of these operating companies have just allowed things to go for so long where it could sometimes it's just, you can't do much with them. But I would say 9 to 12 months. And I think a lot of these companies, they want to see like a 12-month trailing financial statement where they could see the operating history over 4 consecutive quarters. So that's always ideal, is to provide that. That's why I think working with CEOs and business owners who are thinking maybe more 3-4 years down the line, where we can actually build out things and have not just 12, but maybe a 24-month look back after all the pivots and the adjustments have been made, I think goes a long way in maximizing the value of the enterprise when they are ready to.
And I wanted to bring another thought that I find quite interesting. I think the benefit from advisory, like you were talking about, is actually very beneficial for the buyers too. Sometimes buyer would argue, said, look, I can get these companies the dirt cheap and below the market value, almost close to nothing. But they don't really realize they will still have to invest to bring it from the dying horse into something that it can at least pull the cart. You see, and they'll have to pull it out of their resources and their money. So I believe that there is a value for ultra wealthy investors and private equity firms to seek out the advisory for their potential prospecting buyers to really get them in a better shape. So I would call it almost like a soft due diligence. They'll still have to go through the formal due diligence process, but it can be a much lighter lift and at much lower cost if they had an advisory, like a mediator between the two over the prolonged period of time. Right. And they can really say, hey, these guys have their ducks in a row in this area. This is the things that you should be really put some effort in to really take it to the next level. It has a potential. And maybe this thing, you can just not even consider looking into, just throw it away from the day one. You don't want to get in this. It's pretty messy, and let it die. And that way the acquirer party would have a much greater success rate into running those businesses to the next version, to the next stage of their life cycle. And I think that you can actually sell this, right? To partner with some buyers or the investors banking too, to collaborative help everybody's in a party. Because again, even if you grow the valuation of the company, if you grow the value, and it for all parties involved, and it's kind of like the insurance policy that you pay up front that gives you the succession rate probability that it's going to go direction that you want it to go.
Well, like I said earlier, if you could just adjust the fail rate from 80% to 70%, that 10% improvement is massive value creation for both the selling party, who gets a bite of the apple all the way out, and really for the private equity, who gets a much healthier company when they go to buy it, or the investor who decides to buy the company. I think in addition, one of the things that's important to mention here is not just the business advisory, but, offering leadership and executive coaching. I think that goes a long way. I think there are a lot of companies out there that are being led by poor operators, not because they're not good at what they do, but they don't necessarily know how to effectively lead. And I think in today's business culture, more than ever, we have 3 and sometimes 4 generations all working for the same company at the same time. And so what the baby boomers and the Gen Xers respond to versus the millennials and the Gen Zers respond to are radically different. Their work ethic is different. Their expectations of how a company should culturally foster itself is radically different. Communication styles radically different, both on giving and receiving. And so I think that's lost on a lot of leaders. So a lot of companies, it's not that they don't have the bones and the infrastructure to scale and do well and make these changes. It's the fact that culturally they're broken, and there's a disconnect from the leadership ranks all the way down to the organization at every level, where people just aren't responding. It's hard to get them to have the buy-in and mobilize staff to execute a plan that you're trying to achieve for the business. And so I think there's a big hang up there, and people aren't really talking about that. There's really a lack of, I think I call it, there's a lack of emotional IQ at the leadership ranks across all companies, not just privately held smaller businesses, mid cap, but even your large caps and your public companies. I think there's a huge void of true emotional intelligence at those ranks.
And that's where we get into the juicy part, right? This is where your Tony Robbins personality comes to shine the brightest. No, it's amazing that just this morning I had an exact similar conversation with another very successful leader, and she mentioned that she sees this right, in her doorstep, that the smaller to mid-sized organizations that successfully growing their businesses, however, their leadership style and their leadership development lacks and falls behind years. Some organizations in different industries can have ability to win one contract and exponentially grow much, much faster. So they win one contract and they literally double in size in 1 year. However, you can be a business operator one day and next day you're a CTO or CEO or vice president, whatever, just because you have to add the layers of the management. However, the skill set and ability to go through this drastic growth really requires some leadership development and skills. And how do you start being responsible for not tens, but hundreds, sometimes thousands people in a matter of years, right? A couple of years, and maybe sometimes even several months. And there's a great potential of the mentorship, right? Not necessarily executive coaching classes that you take from, online course and you have to do this and this, but from the business perspective, when it comes to the business advisory, we really guide people who've been in the similar shoes. They've lived their pathway. They know the struggles. They can relate to some pain points and help them navigate those turbulent waters, because one of a sudden you have to manage people, and people can be hard. And you not only need to find a way to manage them effectively, but you also need to make sure that they're operating at their best possible productivity levels. They're engaged, they're healthy, challenged, and they're producing the results in a transformational stage of your organization as it grows from the small to mid, or from mid to large. So with that, I want to take you back to your relationship with your dad and how that shaped you as a leader who you are today. And it's a tricky one, but want you to really dive deep into the most memorable aspects of the inspirational leadership example that you draw from your father and how it reflected in your career that you just walked us through.
No, I think it's just, doing what you say, following through. If you make a promise or you commit to doing something, you do it, regardless if it takes you 1 hour or 10 hours. You may think, yeah, I'll do that. And, it's not going to be much of your time or effort. And it turns out to be a lot of time and a lot of effort. And you're like, hey, I didn't expect this to, take more than a day. It's going to take me 3 or 4 days. I don't have that kind of time. I think just having the good character of following through what you say you're going to do, and you complete a project to its end. I think one of the things that used to drive my dad crazy is if I would start something and not finish it. So I would not get a positive response. And so I think that was really big on him. I said, hey, we finished what we start, and it was binary in his mind. Either you did it or you didn't do it, but don't promise to do it and then not fulfill that promise. So I think that was a big part of it. I think, really just to add, when you look at operating expenses within a company, one of the biggest line items in that section of the financial is going to be your SG&A. I mean, that's your payroll, that's your overhead. I mean, and when you are churning employees, right? You have a high attrition or turnover rate, and that costs the business not only real money, real dollars, but there's an opportunity cost because it's hard to build and foster continuity and culture when you have a lot of turnover going on, and that impacts the performance of the business. You got to look at it as almost like a team. If you look at, I think I love to use football as an analogy, but if you're turning the head coach around a lot or changing your quarterback a lot, every year, every other year, it's hard to build that continuity on that team and see the team really walk out the potential that they have because they're constantly starting over under a different visionary or a different leadership style or different this or different that. And I think companies are very similar to that. To build continuity, you have to really rein in that turnover because that's super, super important to build that continuity, foster a culture of performance. And, when I talk about emotional intelligence, what I don't want to mislead your audience in thinking is all of a sudden that means, critical thinking's out the window and we just have to be kumbaya and very empathetic and enable bad behavior and bad decision making. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that you have to almost marry the critical thinking skill set with a relatable, somewhat empathetic style of communicating your expectations and managing people through those expectations and adequately arming them with the technology, the resources, the training, the support, and the structure to thrive. Because you could build systems and processes ad nauseum in a company, but if people are not, following the system and they're not helping manage and maintain that system, then the system's for naught, and you're not going to see the desired results from those adjustments.
Funny enough, we just had another live episode a couple of days ago on LinkedIn with a friend of mine. We talked exactly about the same thing. They asked me how did I come to doing this podcast and bringing this light of the businesses and their stories behind. And I said, look, it's important to have the continuity and the story that unite people together. And regardless of how great, I started myself with the operation piece, and I quickly realized, regardless how great your plan is, it means absolutely nothing if you have no one to really run it. It's like building a Ferrari that there is no one driving. So what's the point of doing that?
Yeah.
And I think you bring a good point. I think it's critically important for companies to understand, regardless of your size, regardless of which stage you're in, consider investing a small portion towards the leadership development within your organization versus just feel like push it down the line, like sometime later, we're fine right now. You may be fine today, but when the shit hits the fan, it's maybe too late, and it's so much exponentially more expensive and harder to turn things around when you get to the point where you are at over 1,000 employees and you're bleeding like crazy. Your turnover rate is 30% or 45%. People don't stick around. Your productivity is low. It impacts your bottom line, and turn those organizations around. It is much heavier lift. So tell me, people would tell me, a lot of businesses are like, this is a necessary expense. From your perspective, how would you convince people and the leaders of the organization to really consider investing into either some sort of mentorship, advisory, consultancy? There are so many options to choose from. What are their biggest problems that they can potentially avoid by not doing so?
I would say, I would look at whatever the actual attrition or turnover rate's been at the company historically. I would compare that to annual retreat that might only be a couple days to kind of refresh on the leadership and do a cost comparison. You also have to consider that as time goes on, that attrition rate, if the leadership side of it's not addressed, could actually go higher. So if you start seeing a 10% turnover, I'm just throwing that number out there arbitrarily, but how does that compare at the enterprise level of turning 10% of your staff around annually versus a 2 to 3 day retreat? I think the other issue is a lot of leaders, once you get to that C-suite or the executive level, and I've been there, I've been in the C-suite where everyone everyone feels that they know everything and they don't need to change, and it's everybody else's problem. And you do a lot of this. And so they say pride comes before the fall. And I think that applies in companies. I think companies really miss the mark because there is a trickle down effect from leadership. And once leaders do a self-reflection and take inventory of what they're good at and maybe what they're not great at, and what are the things here in this bucket, their weaknesses that can be worked on, can be improved through mentorship, training, retreats, whatever, conferences that are really focused on leadership, skill development, communication more than ever. Like I said earlier, how do you get a staff to buy into a business plan when you may have 3 and upwards of 4 generations present in the meeting and you're trying to convey the mandate? It's hard to do that. And I don't think we emphasize at the leadership ranks enough of that is a skill and an art all the same. And so I highly recommend companies to invest some time and money. And I'm not talking about online, like, kind of a tutorial. I'm talking about, really in your face with no distractions for a day or 2, maybe 3, whatever. And you really get in the leaders' faces and really point out, hey, here are some deficiencies that you can improve upon. And by the way, if you're open to it, you're going to come out of this better, stronger as a leader than you ever were before. And you can build on it. I think that's an exciting thing, and not to look at it as a critical thing or a negative thing. It's actually an opportunity for you to grow and learn and become even better and a more effective leader. And it's going to prepare you for the future, whether you stay at that company or you go somewhere else.
That's great what you brought up. And again, don't want to sound too biased, but it seems to me that female leaders are more prone and more open to seek out leadership coaching and encouragement or advisory than men would. And again, maybe it's the egoist thing, maybe it's something else. But again, it's my theory that some of them are like, well, men never ask for directions, right? We have our internal GPS that always works and never fails. That's could be it. But how can you kind of, as a male, help other leaders to really look deeper into themselves? And what is the most dignifying way to reach out for help and advice without being perceived to be weak or like incompetent? And because I think that's the reputation that they're concerned about. Like, I am achieved so much, I've grown so much,
Sure.
I've been through so many things. How can I then acknowledge that I may not be good at something?
These are all good points. And I've worked with several women leaders and executives. And I think you're right. I think a lot of guys kind of are very, they tend to be a little bit more proud and stuck in their ways. And I think women tend to be a little bit more curious is a great way to put it, where they're open to seeking different ways of doing things and challenging the status quo. There's a curiosity about them that I think helps them in leadership ranks. But to your question, I think it's tough. That's really the hard part. You can have a very constructive conversation with a CEO or leader and in a way that is delivered their style, but you can only lead the horse to water. You can't force it to drink. So there are a lot of times you go down that path with them and they're nodding their head in agreement. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's totally me. And then you get them there and it's like, well, I don't have, well, there's an excuse, or not this year, or not this quarter, or, we've got taxes, or, I'm too busy. There's always a reason. And, I think when I work with owners and CEOs of lower middle cap and mid cap companies, I think they tend to be more open because they're entrepreneurial and they know that their goal is to one day have an enterprise value that is such that, work is an option for them after they sell the company. And they know the sacrifice that has come with building this business that's now thriving. And it should be celebrated. I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they're great at promoting the business. Maybe they start out as the first salesperson of their own business. But if you ask them to explain to you why the numbers look a certain way, like, oh, my accounting team does it. Well, there's an opportunity as a leader to grow, right? Hey, we know you're not comfortable with the numbers. We know that you're not a CPA, nor do you ever want to become a CPA or understand GAAP accounting. But we're going to at least build a dashboard out so that these particular numbers, maybe not every number on the spreadsheet, how about these 10, 15, 20 numbers and metrics are really important. And let's tailor a dashboard just for you so that you can kind of keep tabs on this and do it in a scorecard way so that it almost becomes more of a performance review of their own business as opposed to why is this number this and not that. And I think it's storyboards in their mind. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to think more like that, more picture. A lot of them are ADD. So expecting them to stare at a spreadsheet and they're ADD. Have you ever seen that? They're like,
Yes.
they're looking down at the paper, but they're not seeing anything. They're not seeing anything. They're not seeing any numbers. So, to create infographics and metrics and ratios and saying, hey, here are the things that we're really going to focus on and you need to own them. And this is why it's important. I think you get them to kind of come to the table and say, okay, I can develop as a leader here. I need a little help. But once I'm there, I know it'll be.
And to add to your point, there's so much technology that can really help them to get out of their day-to-day Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables to infinity and beyond that can actually get them a better leaders in many different ways. First, they will be able to understand their organization on a completely different level when there's a dashboards built for them or some sort of guidance from and subject matter experts from a slightly different angle explains it to them. Secondly, they'll be able to really openly and in a completely different level communicate to their accounting department, communicate with their sales department, communicate with their operation department, because they'll have more relatable knowledge, and maybe not to the granular level, but on a much deeper level that they will speak the common language. And that will build an empathy, that will build a trust, they'll build a growing relationship within the organization and overall and have a drastic impact. And I think that's what most of them are missing. Small things can lead to the greatest results if it's persistently, consistently implemented little by little, time over time, and get them a better leader. I want you to tell us a little more about the humble story that you've shared. And I think that would maybe, hopefully, inspire some of the leaders who are still pushing back on opening it up for the exploring possibilities of learning. You've shared the story how when you from one organization to another, the people really crave to follow you whenever you go. And I think that story really resonated with me, especially because if you become a better leader, if you work on yourself first, if you open yourself to be humble and vulnerable and really talk to your people and build this relationship of trust, you not only get your organization better and stronger, you actually build this meaningful, deep connections with the people that will follow you till the moon and back. So Can you tell us a little bit more of that?
Yeah, I was the chief operating officer of a company that about 250 employees and maybe 130 million of top line revenue annually. And when I got there, it was a very disjointed organization. So as the ops leader, I recognized immediately we had lapses in communication. We did not have succinct vision and execution and marrying up in terms of, hey, we want to go here. Here's our target revenue, or here's our target pipeline. The execution behind it was flawed. We were missing deadlines. Anyway, so one of the first things I did is I recognized that the department heads at the various departments would hold their cards close to their vest and they wouldn't share. And one of the things I did immediately is I created a weekly meeting that required every department head to be at this meeting, whether they were related to another department or not. And it was an agenda-based, objective-based meeting. And every week, people had to talk about what the top 2 or 3 things were on their plate at that time. And we had to set goals on how, as a committee, we were going to support that person or that department in achieving them, whether that was in a very, very minor way or in a material way. And within a matter of, I don't know, give it 2 months, all of a sudden there was collaboration, people raising their hands saying, hey, I think I can help you with that, volunteering to help. People were not eating lunch by themselves at their desks. They were leaving the office together and having lunch together. It was amazing to see this transformation at the people level. I'm more of a player coach, Eva, so I don't delegate from some ivory tower. I like to roll up my sleeves, get dirty with my team. I think it helps buy in. It helps them see that I'm not above tasks and picking up a shovel and digging in the trenches with them. I think they appreciate that. So I did decide to resign my position for reasons I won't get into here. But when I left, I was, over the then of course, in the next 2-3 weeks or so, I was inundated with unsolicited text messages and calls and emails of staff going, where are you going? And can I come work for you at this other company? And, finally, I'm working for somebody I really enjoy and I don't want to inherit somebody else. And I come follow you wherever you're going. I think that was something I didn't expect, quite honestly. I never expected that. It moved me because it told me that I was doing something right to have that kind of impact on the people that reported up to me. And it felt good, not to pat myself on the back. That's not what this is about. But the fact that I had an impact on somebody or a group of people such that they were like, hey, we have something special here. So wherever you're going, can we come? And I think that was like, that's the exclamation point, right? That's where you're an effective leader, is when you can get people to buy in and also follow you, or at least have the desire to follow you wherever you're going.
So I remember you've mentioned that you actually did ask some of the people why. Like, why did they want to follow you? What's so special about your style of leadership that really made them want to reach out and want them to follow you? What did they answer?
No, I tease them. I said, you don't want to follow me. Why would you want to follow me? And because I'm also somebody who will hand you the rope to hang yourself too as a leader, right? So I'm not gonna micromanage you, but my job is to make sure you're adequately supported with resources and training, all that stuff. But I'm going to give you the rope to hang yourself. You're going to do that. But I hold my staff accountable, and I'm like, why would you want to follow me? And a couple of them just said, you took the time to get to know me as a person, and it wasn't just work related. You'd ask about my son, or you asked about how my weekend was, or you asked, is everything okay? Is there anything else I can do to help you? And I think just asking those questions to show them that I looked at them as people who have a life outside of work and stresses outside of work and things that, life happens to everybody, as you know. And I just, that's the part of, I think, empathetic, high emotional IQ leaders have that, where they're like, they think beyond, the task at hand, and they talk to people and say, hey, is everything else okay? Is there anywhere else I can serve you? I can support you. I can guide you, I can help you. And just those questions were enough for them to go, I've never had that. And I was surprised. And at the same time, saddened that they never experienced that before. But then again, I'm not surprised, because I haven't had much of that myself when I was a young professional. And so it felt good. And I knew that really was something that I needed to continue to study and emphasize in my own training, in my own development, in my own leadership. But at the same time, as I work with client companies and leaders in other companies, is to emphasize that, because you're really only as good as the people's lives you're impacting. And you're either impacting them positively or negatively. Kind of like when you put people in your inner circle, it's a debit or a credit, right? Are they filling you up, or are they draining you?
Bring you
And
down.
so leadership's the same thing. You're either building people up and they're achieving things beyond what they thought they can achieve, or you're breaking them down, and it's a disjointed and very toxic work.
So you are now CEO of your own organization. And I'm not sure if I mentioned the name of it, but can you tell us, how did it all started and how did you come up with the name? What really was behind the naming? I think you gave us some deep thoughts of coming up to the name that really resonated with your values.
Well, first of all, it was an accident. That's the truth.
Okay, that's an answer.
I did not set out to do this. This was sort of, I fell into it again, right? So when I transitioned, I thought, well, I would get back in a corporate gig, a leadership position somewhere. And it's been a very transition, and very challenging, I think, market in general for candidates who are in transition. Even the recruiters are struggling to place some high quality leadership candidates into other companies. And I think that's because of all the uncertainty in the marketplace, whether it's economic or geopolitical with the wars. And now we're in election year. And I kind of laugh at that, by the way, when people say, oh, it's an election year, we're going to hold off. We're going to wait and see. It's like your customers and your clients are okay with that. They don't need to be serviced until, come November, you still have competitive dynamics and you still have to serve your clients and your customers. So anyway, that's another story, but okay. So, that doesn't go away just because it's an election year. So that always makes me laugh a little bit. I fell into it and I created a business called Avon Business Advisors. And I chose Avon only because I wanted to create a safe haven for owners of companies to feel like they weren't just hiring a consultant. They weren't just hiring a coach. Coaching, I think, in my opinion, is so overplayed, that term.
Overplayed. Yep.
And I'm a business coach. I'm a this coach, and I wanted them to know that, hey, they're getting an advisor whose full intent is to insulate them from making some mission critical errors that could cost them an opportunity, increase the value of their enterprise. And so Safe Haven came to me only because I used to have a boat when I lived in California. I had a boat, and it was we would take it from Huntington Harbor, where it was, over to Catalina Island. If you've heard of Catalina Island, beautiful island, about 19 nautical miles off the coast of California. And when we would get there, we would moor up the boat. It would always be in, harbor, and the harbor is really a safe haven for boats. It protects it from wind and seas. And it's a place where, people can safely, be on board their boat without, risk of life and limb and all that good stuff. And so that's always been with me. So Aiden just came to me and I said, I'm going to create a safe haven for these business owners to be open to share with me some of their biggest fears, biggest concerns, worries, and insecurities. And I'm going to help them distill what they consider to be very complex, lots of noise, lots of distraction. And we're going to distill it down to just a few action items. And if we can fix those few action items, their entire life, their entire business, their entire culture is going to completely transform and change for the better.
It's incredible. So if somebody wants to reach out to and find you and a way to connect with you, what is the best way?
Well, I'm in the process of still working on my website. I know AI can do it in about 60 seconds. I'm not that guy yet. I'm still working on the AI thing. I
I'll help
use
you
it.
with anything, like just I can.
The funny thing is I do use AI in my advisory, but when it came to my website, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist there. So yeah. So if you're serious and you're qualified and you want to contact me, I'm happy, Eva, to share my contact information with your audience. You have both my number and my email address. I'm also on LinkedIn, as you know, so happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. And I think that's a great platform to exchange thoughts and ideas. It is how we met. Yeah, that is how we met. Yeah.
And again, my impression with you, I felt like I was in a good hands in a conversation, just with a brief conversation with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll finish up with just saying that, Haven, I didn't design it to be a consulting firm because it felt like if I did consulting, you're kind of captive to your client. And there's only so many clients you can take on as a consultant because you're kind of immersing yourself in that project. Okay. So, I didn't want to become a consultant because you have to immerse yourself in the project or the company. And there's only so many clients you can take on. And I felt like what I really wanted to do is have a profound effect to a wider audience. And that's why I went with the advisory thing. So it's less of the time commitment. It's also less cost to the client because they're not having to pay a crazy amount of hours for me to come on board, which would be cost prohibitive for them, but still get benefit by working with me. And so I don't know where that leads. I think where you said the Tony Robbins thing is I told you that I had a vision once where I had a platform or a stage I was standing on because I meditate a lot, right? So I was like, there was this vision that came to me and I'm standing on this stage talking to this audience. And I don't know if it's a lecture hall or maybe it's just metaphor for my reach is going to be wide and broad and I'm going to impact
Maybe
a
it's
people.
a TED.
Maybe
Have
it's
you
a
thought?
what? Could be. I gotta work on my story though. There's some really
You
good
laid out
presenters.
beautiful. Yes, you laid out the boat and the safe harbor beautifully. I think that can take you to the total next level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence and I appreciate you having me on here and I look forward to coming back. And maybe you'll host a couple people at the same time. We have more of a panel.
Sounds good. I'm all up to all kind of crazy things that we can come up on the Friday. This is
We'll have to connect in about 4 or 5, 6 months and see where things are.
awesome.
All right.
Again, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being with me. Appreciate
Me
it.
too. Thank you. Appreciate you.